Hello and welcome to the Ireland on the Fly podcast about the people and places of fly fishing in Ireland. Stan Headley is a fly angler and fly tyer who would be known to so many people in Ireland and the UK. A regular contributor to Trout Salmon magazine, down through the years, the Orkney angler has also penned 3 books, the Loch Fishers Bible, Trout Salmon Flies of Scotland and Reflections on the Loch, which became the go-to source for Scottish Lochs fishing. But he was also a fan of fishing in Ireland too, especially Loch Carb, and he was a regular visitor to these shores. However, due to illness, Stan says that his fishing days are now behind him. And so this week's interview with him is one tinged with sadness, but also fond memories as he joins us to look back on an incredible life in fly fishing and what it meant to him. But first time you knew Stan well down through the years.
Yeah, I bumped into Stan good few years ago. Through first of all him coming over fishing here and at internationals as well, because he was involved and he mentions it with the Scottish fly fishing team, and got to fish with him here. Also got to fish with him when I covered Scotland for a year with her. And we discussed it there. We got a cracking evenings fishing on Loch Leven. Be well known, as you say, there throughout the country, throughout Ireland, and as you say, well in the UK as well, from his contributions and his articles in Trout and Salmon. Fantastic articles, and he really dealt in depth with loch fishing, and that's loch fishing LOCH and loch fishing LOUGH, because a lot of the styles and methods he covered both Scotland and Ireland. They were the articles I used to go to when I was getting trout and salmon.
So was he the Scottish Tom Dock?
Ah.
Or are you the Irish Stan Headley?
I don't know about that, not, but I don't know if I don't know if people would have been racing to my articles like people would be racing to Stan's.
But he became he was recognised as kind of like the Scottish Lochs expert, wasn't he?
Oh yeah, without a doubt, and across not just brown trout, but and he mentions it as well, how he developed a fondness for the migratory fish like salmon and sea trout. And that was so pertinent to us fishing here on these shores.
And is there a lot of crossover there? And we do touch it with Stan as well, but there's a lot of crossover between the
huge
Scottish
huge crossover. I mean, to give it from another angle, and he mentioned, had we been in Durness before, the first time we arrived in Durness, Kevin Carrigan and myself, we fished Durness, and I think that was 2009, and we were on Loch Borradale, small loch, and we were looking, and we saw seagulls moving as we were getting ready in the boat, and I said, whoa, what, they're on something. And then we saw they were on lake olives, the exact same as here. And God, because we had a couple of Scottish patterns up and everything, we changed everything. And I remember we put an olive bumble, size 12, top dropper, cock robins, red rib sooty olives, all size 12s. Went out, I swear to God, within 5 minutes we each had a fish, and just covering rising fish like I'd be doing here in Cassidy's Bay out in front of me there on a hatch of olives. So the exact same. So the crossover naturally works both ways. And that's why when you be reading Stan's article, you'll be reading with interest, because you'll be picking up bits in it. And it's the same, and I mentioned it there in the Loch Fishers Bible. There's some really good tidbits on little styles, little methods to do with your fishing. Like, we all know about the dibble, and he discusses quite a bit in the book about changing the approach to the dibble and hanging it. It's just a thing well worth doing.
Yeah. So for anybody looking for tips, if you're, a fisher of the wild lochs in Ireland, even though Stan's books are, Trout Salmon Flies of Scotland, Loch Fishers Bible, it's as pertinent to Ireland, and you'd learn quite a bit by reading those books.
Yeah, definitely. And it was the same, the exact same when you used to look for his magazine articles. You look for that, but thankfully, the last book he published was a compilation of all of those. So well worth looking at that, because as we were saying there, I mean, we both remember it when magazines were the way that we got our information, but times have changed.
Yeah, podcast now.
Well, yeah, it is. It's through online content, isn't it?
Listen, don't get me started. I could, our ability to read, our attention spans, all the rest, it's quickly going down the tube, unfortunately.
Yeah, all we want is 2 minute reels now.
Yeah, and how on earth you're going to learn from that, I do not know. Like, it's been proven as well, studies show, in terms of kind of even actually just reading a book, reading paper, reading a magazine, yeah, our ability to take in information and actually keep information is much better than reading on a digital screen. And also it's shown in terms of retention spans have gone from whatever, a couple of minutes back in the 60s to a couple of seconds now.
Yeah, I mean, I've often said it, Darren. I mean, social media stopped me reading, but when the power went here for 12 days, I started reading again, thankfully, and it was great. But it's just what you said there, my attention span. The first night or two when I started reading,
Yeah.
I found it hard to go beyond that 10 minutes. It is, it's over 10 now, isn't it?
Look, €10 50 for a monthly magazine, like I
Yeah.
remember the days it used to be five, €6, like,
Yeah, it was,
I
yeah.
subscribed to I subscribed to Chasing Silver, the quarterly salmon fly fishing magazine. That's about 12, €15 a copy. Like you're just there going, seriously? So I don't
Is that
know.
what that is it?
Yeah, it's hard to justify, I think, but because there's such a plethora of information that's out there for free online, or even through podcasts or through videos. So it's a
Well,
fine line,
yeah, I was just going to say that, well, obviously there's good information on podcasts.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Right, let's get back to this week's guest anyway, Stan Headley, who told us about the writing of his three books on Scottish Lochs fishing.
Well, the first one was obviously the Trout and Salmon Flies of Scotland, which I think I completed in 1997. And actually, nowadays, I consider it a bit out of date.
Right.
There's been a tremendous amount of fly patterns added to the Scottish repertoire over the years, which have not been included in the book, obviously. And it very much reflects the trout flies, certainly reflect what was going on in Orkney in those days rather than on the whole of Scotland. But I did try to adjust that by having contributors from all over Scotland whose names are included in the acknowledgements.
Yeah, I was having a look at it there last night myself, just going over it. Yeah, it must have been an awful lot of work in that actual book, Stan.
I didn't actually feel that way when I was compiling it,
Yeah.
because the guys who I was speaking to were sending me flies on a regular basis, and when they did, I immediately converted them into parts of the book. So it basically had its own timetable, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, it was kind of like organic. It just kept happening as the
Yeah,
flies around. Yeah,
that's
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah. And in those days, I was doing a lot of fishing, and flies were always on my mind. So I hate to tell your audience that I no longer fish and I no longer tie flies. My manual dexterity is gone to a major extent, and I couldn't tie flies now, not to the extent I was tying them before or with the ability I had before. So that chapter is closed, basically, which is, I'm sad to admit it, but it's true.
When you told me that, Stan, yeah, because we hadn't been talking for a while and then when I got on to you and you told me that, I have to say I was really saddened by it.
Yeah, well, I suppose every chapter has to come to an end sometime. And mine is, I just got a phone call from a good friend of mine today who said he'd packed it in as well. And he's slightly younger than me, but he has similar problems. And it will come to us all eventually.
Before we get back to the books, you do have some fond memories, and you did get a fair bit of fishing in, Stan.
I did, yeah. Well, pretty much from a not an economic point of view, but I was pretty much a professional.
Mm.
I was guiding, and I was traveling all over the four countries, basically fishing in competitions and otherwise, and doing work for the magazine. It was my whole life. I mean, apart from my family, which was extremely important to me, but I would have been poor company if I wasn't fishing.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's good that you say that as well about the magazines, because I think it was the magazines that probably created a big awareness of what you've done and what you've written as well over here.
Yeah, Trout Salmon's been a very good friend to me over the years.
Yeah, it has, and I would have read a lot of your articles in it. I mean, moving on then, actually, because one of the books is a lot of the articles. It's a compilation, isn't it?
That's right. Yes,
Uh,
it is. It's a sort of. I looked upon it as an easy option. I wanted to do a book and add to the knowledge that I'd passed on, and most of the stuff that I wanted to mention was in the articles. So it's uh, Paul Morgan was the publisher, and he was quite keen to do it and to help me a lot on the way. I must admit that it's my favourite book of mine uh, because I think it's illustrated beautifully
mm.
and there's some very good photographs. I must mention Peter Gathercole, who took photographs of all the flies, and they are extremely good photographs. He's a
Yeah,
brilliant.
they really are. The photography is excellent, and Peter Cathercall, like it's really, as you say, well deserves to be mentioned because it is just second to none the quality that of those photos.
Yeah.
With that one, then there probably wasn't like because you had written all of it beforehand. It was just a matter of compilation. So I suppose the one you actually had to sit down and plan out and write is the Loch Fishers Bible, which was the second one, your second
That's
book.
right. Yes, I actually moved away from Orkney by the time I compiled that one. But it was a book I'd wanted to write for decades, to basically give a helping hand to people who were going to wild fishing and Scottish fishing, maybe for the first time and needed help.
Mm.
That was the main reason behind it. And I must admit, I enjoyed writing it.
How long of a project was it for you, Stan? Once you decide once you penned the first word, how long did it take then?
It didn't take that long, actually. It was
Mm.
a few months to
All
put it
right.
together. Yeah. I know some authors say it takes years to write books and things like that, but I never found that. I found that writing about fishing was stimulating, shall we say, and I could find the words quite easily. Although I would say that if I was going to do the Loch Fishers Bible now, I would do it slightly differently, but I don't think it was probably the best book I've ever written. We're coming back to Reflections on the Loch again, but uh, there's I've just reread it just recently and found there was bits in it which kind of annoyed me a bit. I could have written them better, but that's the way it is.
A bit of self-criticism doesn't, I mean, it's always as long as you can handle your own self-criticism, Stan, that's not too bad. But it's interesting you should say that because actually, yeah, Loch Fisher's Bible is my favorite of your works. I like it. And like as an Irish wild loch trout fisherman, I have to say that a hell of a lot of the stuff that you put in that is really pertinent to fishing the Western Lochs or fishing any of the wild lochs. And not only that, but like you cover stockfish as well. So there's an awful lot of stuff there um, that you can garner. I mean, I think you took something And what I liked about it, what you did there is, it's quite instructional in some ways, but there's a nice mixture of anecdotes in it as well, where you make it easier to read. I mean, it's and we've had this before, Dar, haven't we? On when we've been talking to people who write, I mean, the how-to manuals. I mean, they can get very. It's almost as if they can get quite tedious to read because you've just been instructed all the time. But I really found with the Loch Fishers Bible that you mixed it up really good and you put it in such a way that this is how you do it, but here's an example of how it works. And this is what happened to me, let's say, one day on a Machair Loch in the Hebrides.
Well, that's very kind of you to say that. I'd like to advise people. I'd like to help people, and this was my way of doing it, basically.
Steg, can I take it back? Because I'm fascinated by the Orkneys. I've never been.
By the way, it's Orkney. It's not the Orkneys. It's
Orkney.
Yeah. It's the same with Shetlands. Nobody ever refers to the Shetlands. It's Shetland.
Oh, is it the same with Shetland?
Right,
I didn't know.
right, very good.
Yeah, because funny because as you know, Darrow, I've been to the or I've been to Orkney a couple of times, and we got said we were told no, it's not the Orkneys.
Is that a common mistake people make in Scotland and England?
Yes, very common. And you hear it on TV, but anybody ever refers to Orkney on the TV, it's always the Orkneys. And you can just hear the groans across the airwaves. The people in Orkney. Anyway.
But no, I'm fascinated with Orkneys.
Orkney.
Still doesn't sound right either way I say it.
You've homework, Tara.
No, it just doesn't feel right. But I suppose we call them the Aran Islands. See, that's why I was wondering. Anyway, okay, I won't get into it. We won't get into a linguistic kind of breakdown at this stage. I'm big into history, Stan, as well. And actually, it's just funny. I was listening to a podcast. I like listening to the rest of his history podcast. I was listening to one. They were talking about the build-up to Battle of Hastings, 1066.
Yeah.
But they were mentioning the Norwegian king. They mentioned how when he was coming over to England, he stopped off in Orkney.
Yeah.
Because, of course, that was the Norwegian kingdom. And that was where, that was a safe stopping off point before then they went down the coast into the north of England.
Orkney is different in many ways. The Orcadians make it different. They're almost a different people from the rest of Britain, and especially Scotland. Accents quite distinguished, but it's a very rural place. It's a farming county, very important one, and that's what makes the fishing so good. Is that prior to what I refer to as the agricultural revolution of the 70s, when farmers started getting a bit more technical about it, the fishing was absolutely phenomenal. It has declined a bit over the years. I'm sorry to say that to people who are planning to go to Orkney. They won't see it like I saw it. And but when I started seriously fishing in the 70s, it was absolutely unbelievable fishing. Unbelievable. And I wouldn't be where I am today with the reputation I've got and whatnot if it hadn't been for Orkney. I owe Orkney a lot. The fishing was so good that there was a lot of people from the south who were coming every year to fish in Orkney. And we mentioned Shetland before, but I always said that Shetlanders go to Orkney for fishing holidays, but Orcadians don't go to Shetland for fishing holidays, because the fishing in Shetland was never quite of the same calibre as it was in Orkney. and that had something to do with the fertility of the land and the lochs that were situated on the land. It was a whole different ballgame. Orkney was unique. Let's put it that way. Orkney was unique from a trout fishing point of view. We had lochs where fish naturally grew big. We had lochs where there was vast numbers of stock, wild stock, obviously, and there were no rainbow trout in Orkney. I don't think there are yet any rainbow trout in Orkney. Even the Shetlanders experimented with stocking rainbow trout in lochs, which was a disaster. It didn't do well at all.
Didn't work, no.
It didn't do well at all. But Orchidians were never, ever challenged to go down that path because our wild brown trout fishing was so good.
I think that's very true when you say that, Shannon. I get asked, because I have been there, that people think it's like other parts of Scotland where there's, glens and, valleys and, heather and all of that. But no, it's really good. The hinterland is really good agricultural land. And just reminds me what I remember Ken Whelan, the fishery scientist, telling me once, and he had a lovely little saying. It's kind of true. It was fat cattle, fat trout.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you see some of the cattle you get to see in the Orkneys. Yeah, you're sort of going, it's really
from an agricultural perspective, Orkney is a cow rearing county.
Yeah.
I think what we say is probably true. Fat cattle, fat trout.
Yeah, I always thought it was a good one. So you were from the Orkneys. Were you born in the Orkneys, Stan?
No, I was born in Fife.
You were born in Fife. And what was the move? Because you were in the Orkneys from a young enough age, weren't you?
Orkney, Tom. Orkney.
Sorry. We'll do that. You were in Orkney from a young age.
Yeah, my family moved to Orkney when I was 8, I think, possibly 7. And we had lived in Glenrothes in Fife for the first few years of my life. And then because they were bringing people over from the west of Scotland, I don't know how to say this without insulting people, but the laws got a bit flouted and there was actually a murder. And my father said, enough's enough, we're going to move. And he looked around for a job and somebody suggested trying Orkney because my father was a very keen shooter and a very keen fisherman. And he looked it all up and thought, yes, I think I'll give that a go. And he looked for a job in Orkney and got one. And we all moved there when I was 8. And it was good. We moved to South Ronaldsay, which is, funnily enough, has virtually no wild brown trout. It has good sea trout fishing, but it had no wild brown trout. So my father had to travel about 15, 20, 30 miles to get some trout fishing, which he probably hadn't banked on, but that's the way it turned out. By the way, I should tell you that my father came from Guyana in South America, and he joined the RAF during the Second World War. And he did try to go back home, but he couldn't cope with the temperatures. After living in Scotland for a few years, he couldn't cope with the temperatures over there. And so the interesting thing about that was on the way here, my older brother, Paul, was born on the way there, and I was born on the way back. So that's just some trivia for those who like trivia.
That's fascinating. He got so acclimatized to the Scottish weather that he couldn't believe it.
He couldn't cope with the temperatures. Yeah, I remember him distinctly being quite partial to the cold weather in Orkney in the wintertime.
Right.
He quite liked it. But then he did a lot of shooting and outdoor sport, whatnot, duck shooting, goose shooting. And I think he quite looked forward to the winters. I did as well, I must admit. When I was growing up, it wasn't the summers I enjoyed so much with the trout fishing. It was the winters with the wildfowling that I really, really enjoyed. That's not to say that I didn't enjoy the trout fishing. The trout fishing was fantastic. But the great thing about it was that when the wildfowling season finished in February, the trout fishing was just getting started. So I spent the bulk of my life outside in the bloody cold.
I can take it from this then that your introduction, you would have fished a lot with your dad then growing up.
Not really.
No?
Really. No, because he had his fishing pals that he liked to go fishing with. I suppose being a kid, I can remember getting very bored sitting in a boat. It probably put him off. My fishing really started with fishing off the Churchill barriers, which some of you might be aware of, mainly because there was quite good cod fishing off the barriers, and I used to sell them and make myself some much needed pocket money because my father was a miserable old git and he didn't give me very much money. So that was the way I developed, by going fishing in salt water. And my introduction to trout fishing was with my father, right enough. I can remember the first day I ever spent on a loch. I was only about 8 or 9.
What loch was it?
Swanee.
Swanee, yeah. I remember you writing a lovely piece of fishing with your dad on Swanee and catching a couple of big fish and the day starting off foggy.
Yeah, it was. We weren't going to go for a while until I basically said, well, I'm not sitting here all day. I'm going to do something. And my father said, well, we might as well try it. And we went to the loch, and I caught the first fish, which was £5.5. And he caught the next one, which was £4.13. And then I had another fish in the evening, which looked like a tiddler to me and weighed 2.5 pounds. And that was Swanee at its height. It was an absolutely fantastic loch. Unfortunately, it was destroyed by bad stocking policy.
Well, it's funny. It was through that article, and I remember the article was titled "Swanee, How I Love You."
Yeah,
and it was through that I'd always wanted to fish Swanee. So it was kind of a realization of something I'd always wanted to do when I got onto Swanee a couple of years ago. But as you say, like the average size in the fish has gone down in the last couple of years. Yeah.
We used to say if you were catching fish on Swanee, they were small. If you were struggling to catch fish on Swanee, they were big. Right. You didn't get a basket full of big fish. You never did. You would get 1 or 2, but and you would have to work for them. But
it was like that good day. You actually only had 3, wasn't it?
That's right.
Yeah, but they were something like 12 pounds.
All big trout, and phenomenal looking trout. And unfortunately, I had 2 fish mounted. One was the £5.5, and another one was another £4.13 that I caught, and both in the same year, but not in the same day. And I had them mounted, and a few years back, I had a fire in the house, and they were just destroyed, which was very sad. One of the biggest losses of my life, because looking at those fish brought back such fantastic memories.
Oh, that was very, very sad. Very sad.
Yeah.
Where was the other fish caught? £4.13.
It was in Swanee as well.
Swanee as well.
Yeah. Swanee was the loch for big fish. There was another loch in Orkney called Scale, which produced big fish as well. I remember there was a story going about when I was a kid that the Orkney Trout Fishing Association was aware that the Queen Mother was coming to Scotland, was coming to Orkney, and they went out and they caught some fish for her. And when she came in and saw the fish, she wouldn't believe they weren't salmon. They were so big, she was convinced they were salmon.
But there were salmon.
So that's a little bit of history for you. But Scale was a fantastic loch. I had some big fish on the Scale as well. I had a 5 pound plus fish. They were all wild fish, native to Orkney. But Scale was a loch that had very poor spawning facilities. So the association regularly stocked it. So it didn't have the same, I don't know what's the word. It didn't have the same attraction as Swanee. Although to a certain extent, Swanee was stocked as well. There was a story going about in my younger days that there were fish in Swanee that had come from Shetland that were hybrids between trout and salmon.
All right.
And they could be recognised by their silvery hue. I only ever saw one that looked like that, but there was some Shetland stock in Swanee, which is contradictory to what I was saying earlier about Shetland fishing. But anyway, it was a loch that was felt needed to be stocked to a certain extent because of its popularity and the fact that the fish were such good eating quality that people tended to keep fish of a Swanee. So there was a certain, and its spawning facilities weren't great either. So there was a certain amount of work put into spawning, but it had to be very, very closely monitored. And as you will know from your experiences, the stocking policy faltered a bit in the 90s, and it's lost what made it unique.
That's a pity. Well, funny, it's interesting. You talk about, how there's a lot of stories and rumors about fish being stocked, and the one you said from the Shetland, but I know you put it in the Loch Fishers Bible. It's commonplace in Scotland. There's a loch on up at the hill, but it's got Loch Leven trout. Like it's as if it's said to bring people to it. Whereas and as you say, like just because it's a Loch Leven trout, if there's no food where it's going to be put into, it's not going to grow big and strong.
They do consistently say, "Oh, the trout in such a loch are very silvery. They must come from Loch Leven trout." But what makes Loch Leven trout silvery is the quality of the water and the quality of the feeding.
Yeah,
and if you take a nasty little brown trout out of a peat mire in the Highlands and put it into Loch Leven, within a year or so, it would be silvery.
And put on weight.
and vice versa.
Yeah.
If you took a Leven trout and put it into a nasty little bog in Scotland, Highlands, it would end up a very dark fish.
Moving on, Stan, like you honed your skills and all your learning in the Orkneys. When did you start moving out and fishing all the other parts of Scotland? Was it through competitions, or was it just through was it through the magazine or competitions?
Well, bit of both. The magazine took to my writing quite quickly, and they suggested that I go to places like Caithness and Sutherland and Shetland and whatnot, and tell people about them. But the principal motivation to travel about was through competitions. I honestly think I would never have been much of a competition fisherman if I hadn't grown up in Orkney, because trout fishing competitions in Orkney are a very big thing. Very big thing.
Yeah. I've seen
So
that from being there. Yeah, I've seen that from being there, Stan. They really are. And it's kind of what holds the club together up there. It's very much part of them, isn't it?
oh yes, very much
Yeah.
so. Yeah,
Yeah.
if you saw three guys standing in the street in Kirkwall having a discussion, one of them was a secretary, another one was the chairman of the club, and another one was only a member, and that was quite a common saying, and it was fairly true because I don't know what it is about Orkney, but the club mentality is very strong in Orkney, very strong. So if you went fishing, you were a member of the club. It's very much true to this day.
Can I ask you about Ireland?
I fished a loch that I can't remember the name of. I was doing a project for, excuse me for saying this, I know his name is not very popular, but the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust about agriculture and its effect upon wild fishing. And I approached them to do the project and suggested a loch which was in the central, the sort of Midlands of Ireland. I can't remember the name of it. And it's very, very frustrating because I had a great time there. The guy whose accommodation I stayed in was an Englishman who, about a decade ago, left Ireland and moved to England and now fishes the Test.
Stuart McTeer.
The very man.
Stuart McTeer. Loch Cheelan. Stuart McTeer. That's it.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Very man. Yeah. I was amazed he had a Scottish name, actually. But
Yeah.
he was Irish. Yeah, and he had I heard a guy who was also Gillian for him.
Dennis O'Keefe with the jumper.
Yes.
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 Small country, isn't it?
Yeah. And I know his son quite well, who gillies a lot on Sheelan.
Kenneth.
Yeah. Very shame. I'm sorry, people. My memory is failing fast. But anyway, and we had some great days. The first trip I had out, and he caught a whomping big trout. I was stunned because I hadn't seen a brown trout like that since I'd fished Swanee. And I just fell in love with the place, and it was great to fish. It was the great thing about it was you could fish any method. You could fish dry fly, you could fish nymphs, you could fish lures, and you could expect some sort of response. But in those days when I was over there, it was the early 90s, and it was in poor condition because of pig slurry.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when I went back to Sheelan, in fact, one of my favourite competition events was on Sheelan. It was a totally different water. The water clarity was phenomenal. And I was manager of the Scottish team.
It was the home international, the 2012 home international. That's right. You were coaching the Scottish team then, weren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't really coaching them. I was just sitting in the bus with them. But no, I'm not quite that arrogant. I took part in the officials match and won it.
Oh, did you? Yeah.
Yes, because I had gone over to Sheelan hoping to fish dry fly. And it was just before the mayfly started to hatch, which was our practice days. And the dry fly wasn't working at all, as you guys all know. And then the match day, the mayfly started to hatch.
Yeah.
And immediately I changed over to dry fly and won the bloody competition. And I was absolutely stunned. I never thought I'd win a competition in an Irish loch, surrounded by nationals, Irish guys, and it was. I felt it was a major achievement on my part.
Yeah, that was a nice one to win, all right, because it did. It turned on that day. I know I wasn't on the team that time. I know a couple of the guys who were. I remember talking to them, and everything felt right for that international.
Yeah,
because Sheelan is a tough lake, as you
yeah,
know. But
yeah,
everything felt right, and the mayfly just started to hatch. So much so that I remember talking to guys that wets were working in the morning, but as the hatch came on, then they switched to dries. Like it
yeah.
was really good, and some cracking fish came out of it. Did you have any
Oh,
good
yeah.
fish that day?
I can't remember anything much over £2, but they were pretty much, that was pretty much the average size of the basket. I
Mm.
can't really even remember how many fish I caught. 5 springs to mind, but I fished with the English manager that day. He stuck with wet fly until I started to race ahead of him, and then he changed to dries, and he couldn't catch a thing on dries. And I looked upon that as a Scotland beat England match.
And you didn't
So,
relish that at all. You didn't relish it one bit.
oh, it's hard to keep me quiet and do afterwards. I tell you that, but a Scottish victory over England is always memorable.
Oh, and always welcome.
Always welcome. Yeah.
Stan, what would you say about the similarities between the brown trout fishing in Ireland and Scotland, and then maybe differences?
I think the big difference, as I discovered in my time, was you can go over to Ireland and the fishing is hellish because the fish are not on.
Mm.
And I'd never experienced that in Orkney. There was never anything that would switch the fish off in Orkney. But for instance, I think it could have been Sheelan again. The fish were on pin fry and just about impossible to catch. And you could see fish feeding, but you couldn't catch them. I didn't have pin fry patterns coming from Orkney. We don't have pin fry in Orkney. There are no coarse fish in Orkney, so there are no pin fry.
No pin fry.
And so I was completely and utterly lost. I didn't know what the hell to do. I was spooning the fish and finding out what they were eating, but I couldn't replicate. So that was the big difference I found in Ireland, is you could go there and the fishing was off, and there was not a damn thing you could do about it. You'd experience that yourself, though.
Yeah. Yeah, but you see, I suppose being that we fish here all the time, we're used to it. It's a bit like exactly what you said there. You're so used to Orkneys. I mean, you fish the Orkneys where
Orkney.
Sorry, God, yeah. God. Can we edit that one out? Sorry. No excuse for that one. So like you fished Orkney, and a bad day there was when, you didn't have a lot of fish, but they were still on and still coming on. Whereas we're used to it here that, when they turn off here, by golly, they turn off. By dad, they're gone. Nothing you can do will bring them on. Yes. So we're definitely used to that part of it.
Yeah, well, that was something I was not used to, and I really couldn't come to terms with it at all. But when the fishing was good, it was unbelievable.
Because you fished a lot of the waters in Ireland.
Yeah.
And
don't ask me to name them.
Oh well, yeah, and Melvin comes to mind, and of course you've fished with us here on both Caravan and Mask when you're over, and you played a part in the octopus as well for Melvin.
Yeah,
the octopus fly.
The octopus fly, yeah.
So you have fished a lot of them, which
I'm quite proud of the octopus.
Yeah, it would be. It is proven to be. It's one of those ones that's lasted. And it's very interesting. Going back to your book there, and I meant to bring it up when you said it. It's very much with when you look at fly books or pattern books from, and at this stage, 1997, it's nearly 30 years ago, Stan.
Yeah.
So you look at anything like in the mid 90s, if you'd have looked at patterns that were working in the 60s, you would have gone, well, I'm not going to use that. I'm not going to use that, because there is a progression. But the octopus is one of those ones. Let's say that the 25 or 30% of the flies, or maybe 40%, that'll still catch fish now.
I sat down at my flat iron vise and I knew I was going off to Ireland in a week, and I had no Irish patterns, and I really felt I was hampering myself by not having some Irish patterns. And I sat down and tied up some patterns, and that's where the long hackle came from looking at old patterns, old Irish patterns, and there was an element of green peter in it, and I'm trying to remember the name of the other fly that caught my mind. It was a long hackled fly, but it was a gold body pattern with a long hackle, created by a famous fly dresser in Ireland, whose name I can't remember either.
I know the one. I actually know the pattern with you. It's the same type of feather, and it's draped over a golden body. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's where that came from, and I was amazed when it worked on Melvin. And the interesting story about Melvin was the weather had been absolutely fantastic for fly fishing, and one of the guys in the Scottish team hadn't caught a fish, and the manager said, "Take him out and show him how to catch fish." So I took him out and I gave him the patterns. The other pattern that was a bit like an octopus, it was called a Peterson's pennel.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever come across it. I named it in honour of our manager, Brian Peterson. And I gave him the Peterson's pennel and the octopus and took him out, and he started to catch fish. And he was amazed, stunned. The next day, the match day, we woke up and the sun was blazing down and there was no wind in the early part of the day. So I, being from a different neck of the woods, decided that those patterns wouldn't work because of the light difference, and changed my approach entirely. Had a very, very poor day. But the guy that I'd given my flies to won the Phoenix Silver, which is the top basket for the Scottish team. And I was absolutely furious with myself. So all I needed to do was stick to the routine that I'd worked out.
Yeah.
And I'd have done all right. But he did, because he didn't know anything else.
Yeah.
And
it still worked for him.
And it worked for him. He got the Phoenix Silver. Bloody hell.
But Melvin is a funny place like that, Stan. I know I've fished a lot, you know, and I presume he was just pulling the same patterns, fishing wets in a flat cam and bright sun.
Yeah.
And they still went for it. Yeah. And whereas, you know, the natural thing to do is, as you say, change your tactics, find down, maybe go on to a couple of mergers or whatever. Yeah.
You learn slowly in this game, but you do, the lessons stick with you. I have found that I'm not alone in thinking that the most memorable fish are the ones you lose. If anybody was to say, what's the most memorable fish that you hooked, it was a trout on Swanee that I reckon was pretty close to double figures. I was out fishing with Norman Irvin, who was my regular boat partner, and Peter Gathercole, and we were doing an article on Swanee, and they'd been fishing. I'd been on the oars, and we were doing a sort of shifts system, and I wasn't fishing for the first half hour, and they were, and they hadn't moved a thing, and it was going to be one of those Swanee days when the big fish came along. So I thought, right, that's it. I'm going to put on a straggly hackled pattern and fish it on the bob. And within minutes, I'd moved this fish, which left a massive hole in the water. So I chucked out back over it again, and it took immediately. Rolled over, and I didn't give it line, and it broke me, smashed me to pieces. And I reckon that fish was in double figures. And that's the most memorable fish I've ever hooked. Apart from, I hooked some very, very big tarpon. Yeah. I found the fish in Cuba. I must admit, when it was time for me to leave, I almost didn't come back.
You enjoyed it that much?
It was absolutely phenomenal. The bonefish, the tarpon, they were unbelievable. Unbelievable. You couldn't eat any of them, but I suppose you could eat the tarpon, but
I don't think they do. Do they? They used to keep the tarpon, but they don't anymore.
no. But no, we released all the tarpon.
Yeah, it's all. Yeah,
it's unbelievable fishing. I mean, I hooked this tarpon, which was £80,
yeah.
and we were very close to the shoreline when I hooked it. And when the guy, he had to go into the water to release it from the hook. And when he was doing that, I turned around and looked around, and the coastline was a mile away. That fish had pulled us a mile offshore.
Right. Yeah.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Interesting. Just touching on that, because then you've obviously tried, let's say, the fine weather saltwater fishing. Did you bother with it much around Scotland?
No.
No.
Just I did a wee bit in around the Aberdeenshire coast.
Yeah.
But not much.
It's a different beast, though, because you're not exactly in Bermuda shorts, I suppose. And no.
It was all wintertime fishing, and it was generally cod fishing from the shoreline. And there was good places and bad places, and it was good. But no, what became a passion in my latter part of my angling career was salmon and sea trout.
Right.
Fishing wet flies for salmon and sea trout in lochs.
Yeah.
And that became a passion of mine.
And was that on the west coast? West coast of Scotland?
Yeah, very much so, yeah. There's only one loch that wasn't on the west coast that was worth going to, and that was Brora, Loch Brora.
Oh, Brora, yeah.
And that was pretty good. I had some great days there. Had my first ever spring salmon from a boat on Brora. And that was an eye-opener, because I generally thought that salmon weren't the greatest fighters in the fish world, but that spring salmon just about pulled me out of the boat. And I couldn't believe it when I saw it. It was a stunning fish.
So then, I was just going to ask you this question now. Outside of the Orkneys, because I know you honed everything on the Orkneys. What would have been? So I'll put it into two. What's your favorite wild brown trout water then in Scotland? And then I'll ask you what your favorite salmon and sea trout.
Loch Leven was my favorite brown trout water. So it was a hard loch to fish, and it didn't take prisoners. And you could have many a blank day, and when the tide turned, you would have a day to remember. But it was a tough cookie.
Yeah.
Had some good fish off of Leven.
Well, I was lucky enough to fish it with you one evening there. When I covered Scotland, remember we went out for an evening once.
Yeah. You did well.
Yeah, I did actually. A couple of crackers. It was lovely. Yeah, really fair play to you. Thanks.
I always said the reason you did well was because you weren't having to look into the light on the loch. You could see your dry fly sitting out there, and you could see when a fish took it. Yeah. And I couldn't, because I was on the wrong side of the bloody boat.
You were, but you see, you were boating me, Stan. See, you were turning the compliment for the day out here. See, thank you very much. It was fine boating, Stan. Fine boating entirely.
You did well that night. I was proud of you that night.
Yeah, no, there were two crackers actually, and another one as well, another average size one. But there really were, because I had fished it, and I had fished it on the international there, and the last international that was there, 2001 or 2002. And for the 5 days, I didn't have a brown. It was all rainbows.
Oh God!
Yeah, and you discussed that in the book as well. So thankfully, it was great to get back and to catch a wild Leven brown on it. So it was a lovely lake. So Leven is your favorite brown. Your favorite salmon and sea trout water. Salmon.
Well, I have to say that the best fishery was Harris. Amasui was my favourite fishery for salmon and sea trout. I had some phenomenal days on Amundsen Lochs, and my best day ever was salmon only, 5 salmon.
Oh, wow.
The amazing thing about that was I had a gilly who worked for the estate, obviously, who took me out, and we drifted. And I had 1 salmon off a rocky point, and then we drifted down towards the Burnmouth and this loch, and we came up on a patch of weed, and he said, "You're going to get a fish here," and he'd no sooner said it than there was a fish. And he prophesied every other fish. He said, "You're going to get a fish in the next 5 minutes," and I would get a fish in the next 5 minutes. Or "You're going to get a fish here," and I would get a fish there. And it was an amazing day. And he'll never forgive me for forgetting his name, but it's one of his most memorable days on the Lochs on Amundsen. And he is now a gilly on the Tay. And I wonder if he regrets leaving Amundsen. I know that it wasn't the best team job, shall we say, at Amundsen. Yeah. There was flaws in it, but the fishing was phenomenal.
Stan, can I ask you, are your fishing days now behind you?
Yes. I have 1 rod, 1 reel, no box of flies, no tackle. I've been basically giving it all away in the past year. My health is just not up to it. I can't do it anymore.
How do you cope with that? Because fishing has been such an integral part of who you are in your life.
Well, I don't know. Really. It has been. But I suppose the thing is, the memories keep it alive in my head.
Yeah.
I'm sensible enough to know that it's going to come to everybody at some stage. I remember my father, being out with my father. I took him out, I don't know when that would have been. I would have been in my 60s, early 70s maybe. And I took him out, and I couldn't believe that he couldn't recognize a Zulu as a fly. He didn't know its name. And Zulu is one of the most commonly used flies in Scotland. And if you couldn't recognize a Zulu by its coloration, then there's something wrong with your head. Well, that's the situation I'm in now. I mean, I could recognize a Zulu, but I probably couldn't fish with it or expect to catch fish with it. It happens to us all. At some stage, you're just going to have to say, time's up, I'm going home, and that'd be it.
And would you even try and get out to the waters just to look out on the waters again, or?
When I visit my daughter Katrina down in Edinburgh, I have to pass by Loch Leven, and I always have a look round when I'm doing that. That's when I miss it.
Well, before we let you go, Stan, you told us about a memorable fish on the fly. Is there any others that stand out for you, maybe?
I do remember there was one. Here's a good note to end on. I was feeling very, very ill one day. I had a very bad virus. My boat partner, who I've already named, Norman Irvin, was due to go and fish a competition with me on Harry. And I phoned him and said, "Look, I'm not going to make it. I'm really struggling with this cold." And he said, "No, you're going." And I said, "No, I'm not, Norman. I'm not going to make it." And well, 10 minutes later, he appeared at the front door and said, "Go on, get your gear. We're going fishing." And I knew I was wasting my time arguing with him, so I went and got my gear, and we set off in the boat on Harry. And you might remember this, Tom, just down the road a bit on the Harry southern shore is Brudgar Bay.
Yeah.
We started in there, and I caught a fish. I remember catching a fish in there, and I knew nothing more about it wasn't really aware of anything after that. I wasn't aware of the way in or anything. I was so gone with this bloody virus. And Norman turned up the next day and said, "Congratulations." And I said, "Congratulations for what?" He says, "You won the competition." I says, "What?" He says, "Yeah, you never missed a fish all day. And you got them all. All the fish that came to you got." I says, "Well, that's bloody amazing. I don't think this ever happened to me before in a hurry." And he said, "Yeah, you won it. Clear and simple." That's one of the days that sticks out in your mind. It's just weird, really. That's fishing.
That is. No, Stan, it's been absolutely fantastic chatting to you. It really has. Great to get up with you again. Sorry to hear that you won't be casting the line anymore, but look, it's great to go over some of your memories with you. It really has been.
Tight lines.
Our thanks to Stan for joining us on the show. And don't forget to rate, review and follow the Ireland on the Fly podcast on Apple, Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Plus, you can keep up to date on IrelandOnTheFly.com as well as on Instagram, and myself and Tom will be back with another episode about the people and places of fly fishing in Ireland.